3 a.m. Nothing is wrong. No crisis. No emergency. No reason for your eyes to be open. But your mind is running. Not toward anything useful. Not solving anything that needs solving. Simply running. Replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. Constructing arguments for situations that haven't happened. Generating questions that have no answers. Pulling threads that lead nowhere. And following them anyway. You've tried everything. The breathing techniques. The phone face down on the nightstand. The promise to yourself that tonight will be different. And still, the mind runs. You have been living inside a machine that will not be switched off. And the most exhausting part is not the thoughts themselves. It is knowing, with complete clarity, that most of them mean nothing, and being unable to stop them anyway. This is not anxiety in any simple clinical sense. This is something older, something deeper. You have always been like this, the child who couldn't stop asking why, the teenager who saw through the performances everyone else seemed comfortable with, the adult who walks into a room and immediately understands things about it that other people will never notice. Your mind has always moved faster than the world around it, seen further, felt more, understood things that would have been easier not to understand. And for a long time you believed this was simply how you were built, that the noise was the price of the clarity, that the sleepless nights were the cost of seeing clearly. But somewhere along the way, the noise stopped feeling like a feature and started feeling like a punishment. Because here is what nobody tells the person with the loud mind. Intelligence does not protect you from suffering. It amplifies it. The more clearly you see the world, the more precisely you understand human behavior, the more honestly you face the gap between what is and what should be, the heavier the weight becomes. Most people are protected from a certain quality of suffering by the comfortable fog of not thinking too deeply. You don't have that fog. You never did. And that clarity, that specific, exhausting, relentless clarity, is both the most valuable thing about you and the thing that is slowly wearing you down. Your mind is not broken. It is the kind of mind that sees too much. And paying that price, without understanding why, is what's destroying you. There was a man who understood this better than anyone who has ever lived. Not a therapist, not a neuroscientist, not a productivity guru with a morning routine. A philosopher who looked at the human condition with such unflinching honesty that most people who read him either changed completely or put the book down and never picked it up again. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer, and he had the loudest mind of the 19th century. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in Danzig, the son of a wealthy merchant father who died when Schopenhauer was 17, and a mother who was one of the most celebrated writers in Germany. His mother threw him out of her house. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. Simply, she found him difficult. His intensity, his relentless questioning, his refusal to perform the comfortable social pleasantries that kept society functioning. She found it exhausting. He spent most of his adult life alone, not because he was unlikable in any simple sense, but because the quality of his mind made ordinary social interaction feel like a kind of slow suffocation. He understood things too precisely. He saw through performances too quickly. He felt the weight of existence too directly to pretend otherwise, and from that solitude, from those decades of living inside the loudest possible mind with nowhere to take the noise, he wrote one of the most important philosophical works ever produced. He called it The World as Will and Representation, and its central argument will explain something about your 3 a.m. mind that nothing else has ever quite managed to explain. Schopenhauer believed that beneath everything, beneath consciousness, beneath thought, beneath the civilized surface of human life, there is a force he called the will. Not willpower in the way we use the word today, Something older, something more primal, a blind, insatiable, directionless drive that underlies all of existence. In nature, it expresses itself as the drive of every living thing to survive, to reproduce, to persist. In human beings, in creatures conscious enough to observe themselves, it expresses itself as desire. Endless, restless, never satisfied desire. The desire for more. The desire for different. The desire for resolution that never quite arrives. The desire for peace that the mind generates and then immediately undermines. Schopenhauer's insight was devastating in its simplicity. The will cannot be satisfied. Not because you are doing something wrong, not because you haven't found the right method or the right mindset or the right morning routine, but because the will, the force driving the restless mind, is not designed to be satisfied. It is designed to keep moving, and a mind intelligent enough to observe this process clearly is a mind that will feel the full weight of it every single night at 3 a.m. Here is what Schopenhauer understood about the loud mind that modern psychology is still catching up to. The noise is not a malfunction. It is the will expressing itself through a consciousness sophisticated enough to hear it clearly. Most people experience the will as background noise, a general restlessness, a vague dissatisfaction, an unnamed wanting that they manage with distraction, with routine, with the comfortable numbness of a life lived on the surface. You cannot do that. Your mind is too precise for comfortable numbness, too honest for the kind of distraction that actually works, too aware of its own processes to be successfully fooled by them. So the will runs louder in you than in most people, not because you are broken, because you are awake, and being awake, truly, fully, honestly awake to the nature of existence, is the specific burden of the kind of mind you have. Schopenhauer described this with a precision that still cuts after 200 years. The more intelligent the person, the greater their capacity for suffering. Not because intelligence causes suffering in any simple mechanical sense, but because intelligence removes the buffers, the comfortable illusions that protect most people from the full weight of existence, the belief that satisfaction is always just around the corner, that the next achievement will be the one that finally feels like enough, that the restlessness will stop when the circumstances are right. Your mind sees through all of them, and seeing through the illusions while still being subject to the desires they were protecting you from, that is the specific, exhausting, relentless experience of the loud mind. This is what it looks like in your specific daily life. It looks like finishing something you worked toward for months, a goal, a project, a relationship milestone, and feeling within days the familiar restlessness returning. The sense that this wasn't quite it, that the satisfaction you expected hasn't arrived in the form you imagined. It looks like being in a conversation and simultaneously having the conversation, observing yourself having it, analyzing what you should be saying differently, and wondering why you can never simply be present without the commentary running underneath. It looks like the scrolling that isn't really about the content. The podcasts playing not because you want to learn, but because the silence is where the thoughts get loudest. It looks like relationships that feel insufficient, not because the other person is lacking, but because your mind generates an ideal version of every situation that reality can never quite match. It looks like being exhausted by your own intelligence, by the specific, relentless, never-resting quality of a mind that will not give you peace, even when peace is the only thing you want. Schopenhauer called this the tyranny of the will, and he was honest, brutally, uncomfortably honest, about the fact that there is no permanent escape from it. But he was also precise about what actually helps. If you know someone whose mind never gives them peace, send them this video. Sometimes being understood is the only relief that actually works. Schopenhauer identified 3 things that genuinely quiet the will. Not permanently, not completely, but in ways that are real and accessible and worth understanding. The first was aesthetic experience, art, music, literature. The specific quality of losing yourself in something beautiful enough that the will, briefly, mercifully, goes quiet. Not as escape. Not as distraction in the cheap sense, but as the one experience that temporarily suspends the tyranny of wanting, because in the presence of genuine beauty, the mind stops generating and simply receives. Schopenhauer believed music in particular was the closest human beings could come to directly experiencing existence without the noise of the will running underneath it. Find what does this for you, not what you think should do it, what actually does. The second was compassion, recognizing that the suffering you carry, the loudness, the restlessness, the specific weight of seeing too clearly, is not yours alone. Every conscious being carries a version of this weight. The man across from you on the train, whose face carries the specific expression of someone who has been awake at 3 a.m., asking unanswerable questions. The person you know, who performs contentment so thoroughly, you almost believe them. Compassion, genuine, unsentimental compassion, is the recognition that the will runs in everyone, that the suffering of consciousness is not a personal failure, but a shared condition. And that recognition, Schopenhauer believed, is both ethically necessary and psychologically relieving. The third was acceptance, not resignation, not giving up. The specific, active, chosen acceptance of what is, including the loudness of the mind, including the restlessness, including the gap between what is and what the mind generates as ideal. Schopenhauer called this the denial of the will. The moment a person stops fighting their own nature and simply allows it to be what it is. The 3 a.m. mind does not need to be fixed, it needs to be understood. And once it is understood, once you can name what it is and why it runs the way it runs, something changes. Not the noise itself, but your relationship to it. You are not given a quiet mind. You are given the kind of mind that sees clearly, feels deeply, and cannot be comfortably fooled by the illusions that make ordinary life manageable for most people. That is not a defect. That is a specific kind of consciousness that the world needs, even when it exhausts the person carrying it. Schopenhauer spent his entire life inside that consciousness, alone, misunderstood, too honest for comfortable company. And from that aloneness he produced ideas that are still being read 200 years later by people sitting alone at 3 a.m. wondering why their minds will not stop. People like you. The noise will not disappear. The will does not retire. But the relationship you have with your own mind, the way you hold the loudness, the way you understand it, the way you stop fighting it as a flaw and start recognizing it as the specific price of a specific kind of clarity. That can change. And when it does, the 3 a.m. mind stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling occasionally like the most honest thing about you. If you've ever felt that your mind is both your greatest gift and your heaviest burden, you belong here. Subscribe and join us every week. Think about the last time your mind kept you awake, not because anything was wrong, simply because it would not stop. What was it trying to solve? Drop it in the comments. Just one thing. I read every single one. Next week we go somewhere most people are too afraid to look. We're going to talk about why you subconsciously destroy the things that are actually good for you, and the shadow reason behind every act of self-sabotage you've ever committed. If you've ever watched yourself ruin something good and couldn't explain why, that video is made for you.